Li Hun walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber. His heart beat fast, but he kept his face calm. Today was the day that could end humanity's place among the stars. The chamber was huge. It stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of different alien beings sat in curved rows around a central stage. Some looked like giant crystals that sparkled with inner light. Others were floating energy clouds that changed colors when they spoke. A few looked almost human, but with too many eyes or arms in wrong places. Li Hun was not alone. Behind him walked Park Jae, a military man with scars on his hands from old battles. Next to Park Jae was Kim Nari, a scientist who studied alien life forms. She carried a data pad that held years of research about every species in the council. They took their seats in the section marked for humans. The chairs were small compared to most others in the chamber. Humans were one of the youngest and smallest species here. Many others had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. A deep sound filled the chamber. It was not quite a voice and not quite music. Everyone became quiet. High Speaker Vexithorian of the Vorthak Collective rose from his seat. He was 12 feet tall with skin like dark metal. When he moved, his body made soft clicking sounds. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Vexithorian said. His voice came from speakers around the chamber, translated into every language. "We gather today to discuss Resolution 47X. This resolution asks a simple question. Should humans continue to represent their species in this council, or should they be replaced?" A wave of whispers moved through the chamber. Li Hun felt his stomach drop. He had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it real. Vexithorian continued. "We have found a better choice. The ethereal species from the edge of our galaxy. They are perfect in ways that humans can never be." A section of the chamber filled with soft, golden light. The ethereals appeared, but they were hard to look at directly. They seemed to be made of pure light and thought. When they spoke, their words appeared directly in everyone's mind. "We are honored by this consideration," the ethereals said without moving their mouths. "We offer perfect logic, eternal peace, and unity of purpose. We do not suffer from the chaos that marks human behavior." Li Hun clenched his fists. Around the chamber, other species began to nod. A crystalline being from the Zephyrian Empire spoke next. "Humans are too emotional," the crystal being said. Its voice sounded like breaking glass. "They make decisions based on feelings, not logic. This leads to mistakes, big mistakes." A representative from the Nexus Collective agreed. The Nexus were a species that shared one mind among millions of bodies. "Individual human thinking is inefficient," all of their representatives said at once. "How can one mind make good choices for billions?" More voices joined in. The complaints against humans were always the same. Too emotional, too violent, too short-lived to plan properly, too weak compared to other species, too chaotic to trust with important decisions. Park Jae leaned over to Li Hun. "Should I remind them who saved their crystal cities when the shadow plague hit?" he whispered. "Not yet," Li Hun whispered back. "Let them talk first." Kim Nari was reading data on her pad. Her eyebrows went up in surprise. She showed the screen to Li Hun. The information about the ethereals was strange. Their population was going down every year. They had not explored beyond their home system in over 1,000 years. For such a perfect species, they seemed to do very little. High Speaker Vexithorian raised one of his forearms. "The evidence is clear," he said. "Humans are a liability to galactic peace. The ethereals offer everything humans do, but better. They are smarter, calmer, and more logical. They do not start wars. They do not make emotional mistakes." Li Hun stood up. The chamber became quiet as thousands of eyes, sensors, and other organs turned toward him. He felt very small, but he spoke anyway. "Honored members of the council," he said. "Humanity requests the standard 30-day probation period. Give us 1 month to prove our value to this galaxy." Some beings in the chamber laughed. The sound was strange, like metal scraping against stone or wind through crystal caves. A few species made sounds that might have been approval. Vex's Thorian's 4 eyes focused on Li Hun. "Very well," he said, "but this will not be a normal probation. We have challenges that have stumped this council for centuries. If humans are truly valuable, they will succeed where others have failed." "We accept," Li Hun said quickly before he could think about what he was agreeing to. "Excellent," Vex Thorian said. He almost sounded happy. "Your first task is the mystery of the Broken Worlds, 3 star systems where advanced civilizations destroyed themselves in wars. Many expeditions have tried to understand why these species chose death over peace. All have failed. The chamber filled with images. 3 star systems appeared in the air above their heads. Each system had planets that were once beautiful and full of life. Now they were burnt rocks floating in space. Cities that once held billions were now empty ruins. You have 7 days to solve this mystery," Vexithorian continued. "If you succeed, you will face 2 more challenges. Fail any of them, and humanity loses its place in this council forever." As the council session ended, beings from hundreds of species filed out of the chamber. Some looked at the humans with pity. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. The ethereals simply faded away like morning mist. Li Hun, Park Jae, and Kim Nari sat alone in the empty chamber. The weight of their task pressed down on them like a heavy blanket. 3 civilizations that chose to destroy themselves rather than make peace, Park Jae said. "Every military strategist in the galaxy has studied these wars. No one understands why they did it." Kim Nari looked at her data again. "The strange thing about the ethereals," she said slowly, "is that they seem too perfect. Look at these numbers. No crime, no conflict, no exploration, no population growth. It's like they stopped living and just exist." Li Hun stared at the images of the dead world still floating above them. "Maybe that's the key," he said. "Maybe the question isn't why these species chose to fight. Maybe the question is why they chose to die rather than become something else." The 3 humans left the chamber, carrying the future of their species on their shoulders. They had 7 days to understand something that had puzzled the greatest minds in the galaxy for hundreds of years. But for the first time since walking into the chamber, Li Hun felt a small spark of hope. Humans were good at understanding things that others found impossible to explain. They were especially good at understanding why people made choices that seemed crazy to everyone else. The research ship Human Dream moved through space toward the first of the Broken Worlds. Li Hun stood on the bridge, looking out at the dead system ahead. 3 planets orbited a yellow star. Once, those planets had been home to billions of living beings. Now they were silent tombs. "The Kronos system," Kim Nari read from her files. "Population of 12 billion. They were warriors who valued honor above everything else. Their armies were the best in this part of the galaxy." Park Jae studied the military reports. They had enough weapons to destroy 100 systems, but they turned all those weapons on themselves and their enemies at the same time. Made sure everyone died together. Li Hun shook his head. "The council reports say it was a strategic mistake, poor communication between their generals. But that doesn't make sense. These people fought wars for 3,000 years. They knew how to communicate in battle." The ship moved into orbit around the first planet. The surface was covered in the ruins of great cities. From space, they could see the massive blast craters where the final battles had been fought. Nothing moved down there. Nothing grew. Even after 500 years, the planet was still dead. "The council teams always focused on the military data," Kim Nari said. "Battle plans, weapon specifications, troop movements, but they never looked at anything else." "What do you mean?" Li Hun asked. Kim Nari smiled. "They never looked at the poetry." Park Jae raised an eyebrow. "Poetry won wars?" "Poetry tells us why people fight wars," Kim Nari corrected. She pulled up files on her screen. "Look at this. Kronos battle poems from the years before the final war." Listen to what they were really worried about. She began to read. The poems talked about honor and strength, but also about fear. Fear that their way of life was ending. Fear that their children would grow up soft and weak. Fear that their enemies wanted to change them into something they could not recognize. They weren't afraid of dying, Kim Nari said softly. They were afraid of becoming something that wasn't them anymore. The ship moved to the second planet in the system. This one had been covered in training grounds and military academies. Young warriors had come here to learn the old ways of fighting. The ruins showed that this planet had been destroyed last after the others were already burning. Park Jae was quiet for a long time, studying the data. Finally, he spoke. "I've seen this before," he said. "On Earth. During the final days of some wars, soldiers who chose to fight to the death rather than surrender, even when surrender meant they could live." "Why would they do that?" Lee Hoon asked. "Because sometimes living means giving up everything that makes you who you are," Park Jae said. "And some people would rather die as themselves than live as strangers." They spent 3 days in the Chronos system, reading everything they could find. Not just military reports, but personal letters that survived the destruction, diaries from soldiers, songs that children learned in school, stories that families told around their dinner tables. The picture that emerged was different from what the Council had believed. The Chronos people had not destroyed themselves by accident. They had made a choice. Their enemies had offered them peace, but the price was giving up their warrior culture. They had to become peaceful farmers and traders. Their weapons would be melted down. Their military traditions would be forgotten. They chose death over cultural extinction, Lee Hoon said as they prepared to leave the system. They preferred to die as warriors rather than live as something else. The second system was called Valdris. The people there had been merchants and artists. Their ships had carried beautiful goods to every corner of the galaxy. Their cities had been filled with museums and concert halls and galleries. But like the Chronos warriors, the Valdris merchants had chosen to destroy everything rather than accept peace. Their enemies had offered to end the war if the Valdris would agree to make only practical goods. No more art, no more music, no more beauty that served no useful purpose. Kim Nari found the evidence in a children's museum that had somehow survived the final bombing. The walls were covered with paintings made by young Valdris artists. The paintings showed their world becoming gray and empty. Children drew pictures of factories replacing flower gardens. They drew pictures of machines making identical objects, instead of unique, beautiful things. They saw their future, Kim Nari said, touching one of the paintings. A world where everything was efficient and practical, but nothing was beautiful anymore. The third system told the same story. The Helix Collective had been scientists and philosophers. They had spent centuries asking questions about the meaning of life and the nature of existence. Their peace treaty would have required them to stop asking such questions and focus only on practical research. Each of these civilizations faced the same choice, Lee Hoon said as they finished their investigation. Live peacefully by giving up what made them special or die as themselves. Park Jae nodded. And they all chose the same thing. They chose to be remembered for who they were, not hated for who they were forced to become. They were preparing their report when Kim Nari made another discovery. She had been monitoring communications from the ethereal ship that was observing their mission. The ethereals had been commenting on the human investigation to the Council. "Listen to this," she said, playing the recording. The ethereal voices were as beautiful and calm as always. "The humans continue to focus on emotional factors," the ethereals reported. "They spend time reading poetry and looking at children's artwork instead of analyzing strategic data. This primitive approach to problem-solving confirms our assessment of their limitations." Lee Hoon laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "They still don't get it, do they? They think understanding feelings is primitive." "That's because they don't have feelings to understand," Park Jae said. "Perfect beings don't need to worry about losing what makes them special. They don't have anything that makes them special." The human dream arrived back at the Council station after 6 days of investigation. Lee Hoon had asked for a special session to present their findings. The chamber was not as full as it had been during the first meeting, but representatives from the major species were present. High Speaker Vexithorian looked down at the 3 humans. You have had time to study the mystery of the broken worlds, he said. What have you discovered that centuries of investigation could not reveal? Li Hun stood up. Behind him, images appeared showing the 3 dead systems. The previous investigations all asked the wrong question, he said. They asked why these civilizations chose to fight impossible wars. But that's not what happened. The chamber became quiet. Even the ethereal seemed to be paying attention. These civilizations didn't choose to fight. Li Hun continued. They chose to remain themselves. Each of them was offered peace, but the price was giving up their culture, their traditions, their way of life. They had to choose between living as strangers or dying as themselves. A crystal being from the Zephyrian Empire spoke up. That is illogical. Living is always better than dying. Is it? Kim Nari asked, stepping forward. What makes life worth living? Is it just breathing and eating and existing? Or is it being who you are, doing what matters to you, living according to your values? She activated her datapad. Images filled the chamber. Poetry from Kronos warriors, artwork from Valdris children, philosophical writings from Helix scientists. These people understood something that pure logic misses, Kim Nari said. They understood that some things are worse than death. Being forced to become everything you despise is one of those things. Park Jae spoke next. Every military leader in the galaxy studied these wars and called them strategic failures. But they weren't failures. They were successes. Each civilization succeeded in remaining true to itself until the very end. The ethereal representative appeared in the center of the chamber. This analysis is based on primitive emotional reasoning, it said. Practical survival should always take priority over abstract concepts like cultural identity. Li Hun looked directly at the glowing figure. And that, he said quietly, is exactly why you could never have solved this mystery. You don't understand that some things matter more than just staying alive. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some beings argued with each other. Others sat in thoughtful silence. The Zephyrian crystals chimed softly as they processed the information. High Speaker Vexathorian raised his arms for quiet. The first challenge is complete, he announced. The humans have provided an explanation that no previous investigation discovered. Whether this explanation is correct or useful remains to be seen. As the session ended, Li Hun noticed that several council members were looking at the human delegation differently. Not with pity anymore, but with something that might have been respect. The ethereals departed without another word, but their perfect calmness seemed somehow less impressive than before. The alarm sirens were loud enough to wake the dead. Li Hun jumped out of his bed in the human quarters and ran to the communication center. Red lights flashed everywhere. Park Jae and Kim Nari were already there, reading the emergency reports, coming in from across the galaxy. What's happening? Li Hun asked, still pulling on his uniform. The Phaseling homeworld, Kim Nari said, her face pale. Something's wrong with time itself. The main screen showed images from the Phaseling system. The planet looked normal from far away, but as the camera zoomed in, something impossible became clear. The same planet existed in multiple versions at the same time. In one version, it was covered in green forests. In another, it was mostly desert. A third version showed vast cities where the first two had wilderness. It's stuck in a temporal paradox, Park Jae said, reading the technical reports. The planet exists in several different timeline states simultaneously. The effect is spreading to nearby space. Li Hun studied the data. The Phaselings were a peaceful species that could sense changes in time. They had always been helpful to the Council, warning about dangerous time experiments and temporal anomalies. Now their entire world was trapped in some kind of time loop that no one understood. This isn't a test, Kim Nari realized. This is a real crisis. If the paradox keeps growing, it could tear apart this whole section of the galaxy. The communication system activated, showing High Speaker Vexathorian. Behind him, the council chamber was full of panicking representatives. Emergency session, Vexathorian announced. All available species are requested to assist with the Phaseling crisis. Within an hour, Li Hun found himself back in the council chamber. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of formal debates, there was organized chaos. Different species were shouting out theories and solutions. Technical data flowed across dozens of screens. The Zephyrians have tried. Crystalline mathematics, someone reported. No effect on the paradox. The Nexus Collective used unified computational power. Another voice called out. The paradox actually got worse. Vorthak dimensional manipulation failed. A third report came in. The timeline splits are increasing. Li Hun watched as the greatest minds in the galaxy threw their best science at the problem. Nothing worked. In fact, every logical solution seemed to make the situation worse. The ethereal representative appeared in the center of the chamber. We have attempted to harmonize the temporal frequencies using perfect mental resonance, it announced. The paradox has rejected our intervention. Kim Nari was studying her datapad again. This is strange, she said to Li Hun. Look at these cultural files about the phaselings, their art and literature from the past few centuries. Li Hun looked at the screen. Phaseling artwork was usually abstract, showing the flow of time and possibility. But in their recent art, something had changed. Every piece seemed focused on the idea of what might have been. Their stories were about people making different choices. Their music was about alternate versions of the same song. They're obsessed with alternate timelines, Li Hun said. But why would that create a paradox? Park Jae had been quiet, thinking. I've seen this before, he said slowly. Not with time, but with soldiers in battle. Sometimes a soldier becomes paralyzed, not by fear, but by thinking too much about all the different choices they could make. Kim Nari's eyes went wide. You think the entire planet is paralyzed by choice? Look at the timeline splits, Park Jae said, pointing to the screen. Each version of the planet represents a different choice the phaselings made at some point in their history. What if they became so focused on all the possibilities that they couldn't choose just one anymore? Li Hun felt something click in his mind. Around the chamber, other species were still trying logical solutions. They were treating the paradox like a technical problem that needed to be fixed. But what if it wasn't technical at all? Request. Permission to approach the phaseling homeworld, Li Hun said suddenly. The chamber became quiet. Vexathorian looked down at him. That would be extremely dangerous. The temporal effects could trap you in the same paradox. Or it could help us solve it, Li Hun said. But we need to try a different approach than everyone else. Several hours later, the human dream moved slowly toward the phaseling homeworld. The effects of the paradox were visible even from a distance. Space itself seemed to shimmer and bend. The ship's instruments showed readings that made no sense. We're detecting at least 7 different versions of the planet, Kim Nari reported, each one in a different timeline state. Can we communicate with them? Li Hun asked. I'm getting signals from all versions at once, the communications officer reported. It's like listening to 7 different conversations happening at the same time. Li Hun took the communication device. Phaseling friends, he said. This is Ambassador Li Hun from Earth. We're here to help. The response came back as a confused mixture of voices. Some phaselings were asking for help. Others were denying that anything was wrong. Still others seemed to be having conversations about events that had happened centuries ago. They're experiencing all their possible timelines at once, Park Jae realized. They can't focus on just one reality anymore. Kim Nari was studying the phaseling psychology files. According to this, they're naturally anxious about making the wrong choices. Their time sense lets them see all the possible consequences of their decisions. Recently, that anxiety has been getting worse, Li Hun understood. The phaselings hadn't been trapped by some external force. They had trapped themselves by being unable to choose between all the possibilities they could see. We need to help them make a choice, he said. Not the right choice, just a choice. How do you help an entire planet choose? Park Jae asked. Li Hun thought about it. On Earth, when people were paralyzed by too many options, sometimes they needed someone to just listen to them, to help them work through their fears and doubts. We talk to them, he said. We help them process what they're feeling. For the next 6 days, the three humans did something that no other species had tried. They didn't attempt to fix the paradox with technology or logic. Instead, they talked to the phaselings. They listened to their fears about making wrong choices. They shared stories about human mistakes and how people learned from them. Park J told them about military decisions he had made under pressure. Some had been right, some had been wrong, but all had been necessary. The perfect choice doesn't exist, he said. There are only the choices you can live with. Kim Nari shared stories about scientific experiments that had failed, but led to unexpected discoveries. Failure isn't the opposite of success, she explained. It's part of success. Lee Hoon talked about democracy and politics. Humans make group decisions all the time, he said. We vote, knowing that about half the people will disagree with the result. But we've learned that making an imperfect decision together is better than being paralyzed by trying to find the perfect one. Slowly, the voices from the planet began to come together. Instead of 7 different conversations, they started hearing more unified responses. The phaselings were beginning to focus on one timeline instead of trying to experience all of them at once. We are afraid, the phaseling voices said. What if we choose the wrong path? What if we miss something better? Then you'll learn from it and make a different choice next time, Lee Hoon said. That's what living things do. They choose, they learn, they grow. On the 7th day, the paradox collapsed. The multiple versions of the planet faded away, leaving only one. It wasn't the version with the most beautiful forests or the most impressive cities. It was just the version the phaselings could accept living with. The communication came through clearly for the first time in weeks. Thank you, humans, the phaselings said. We understand now. The beauty isn't in making the perfect choice. It's in being able to make any choice at all. Back in the council chamber, the crisis was officially declared over. Representatives from dozens of species celebrated the solution, but Lee Hoon noticed that many of them looked confused. The ethereal representative appeared once more. We do not understand how this solution was achieved, it said. The humans used no advanced technology. They applied no mathematical principles, they simply talked. Sometimes that's all people need, Lee Hoon said. Someone to listen to their fears and help them realize that it's okay to be imperfect. High Speaker Vexithorian stood up. The second challenge has been completed, he announced. The humans have succeeded where advanced logic and technology failed. One final test remains. As the session ended, Lee Hoon noticed something troubling. The ethereal representative had not faded away like usual. Instead, it stood motionless in the center of the chamber, its perfect form flickering slightly. Kim Nari noticed it too. Is it having problems? She asked. Lee Hoon studied the ethereal being. For the first time since meeting them, it looked less than perfect. I think, he said quietly, that our solution to the phaseling crisis might have created a new problem. The final test came sooner than expected. 3 days after solving the phaseling crisis, Lee Hoon received an urgent message to report to a restricted section of the council station. He had never been there before. Even Park J, with his military clearance, had never seen this area. The corridor was longer than it seemed possible. The walls were made of some material that absorbed sound, making their footsteps silent. At the end of the corridor, a massive door opened without any visible controls. Inside was a room that defied logic. It seemed to stretch in all directions, filled with floating displays and data streams. High Speaker Vexithorian was there, along with representatives from the oldest species in the council. But they all looked nervous, which was unusual for beings who had lived for thousands of years. This is not a test, Vexithorian said without introduction. This is a choice that will determine the future of consciousness in our galaxy. The displays around the room activated, showing star maps that covered vast distances. Entire sectors of space were marked in different colors. Lee Hoon realized he was looking at a map of civilizations that spanned multiple galaxies. The silent sectors, Kim Nari whispered. She had read about them in the restricted files. The regions where advanced civilizations simply vanished. Not vanished, Vexithorian corrected. Absorbed. The displays changed to show recordings from deep space. At first, they looked like empty star systems. But as the resolution increased, something became visible. Vast networks of energy that connected entire solar systems. Patterns of light that suggested intelligence on a scale impossible to imagine. "We have found them," Vexithorian continued. "All the missing civilizations. They joined something called the Unity, a collective consciousness that spans several galaxies." Park J studied the displays. "How many species are we talking about?" "Thousands," one of the older representatives said. "Perhaps millions. Every advanced civilization in those sectors eventually joined the Unity. They gave up their individual existence to become part of something perfect." Li Hun felt a chill run down his spine. "What does this have to do with our final test?" The displays changed again. This time they showed a message. The text appeared in every language simultaneously, beautiful and terrible in its simplicity. "Greetings, young civilizations of the Galactic Council. We are the Unity. We have watched your struggles with interest. We offer you the same gift we have given to countless others, the end of conflict, suffering, and uncertainty. Join us, and know perfect peace forever." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Kim Nari spoke up. "They want to absorb the entire Galactic Council?" "The offer has been made," Vexithorian said. "Many species are interested. The Unity promises an end to all the problems that plague individual consciousness. No more war, no more disease, no more death, no more difficult choices or painful mistakes." Li Hun looked around the room at the alien faces. Some looked hopeful, others looked terrified. "What does this have to do with humans?" "The Ethereals have voted to accept," Vexithorian said. "They believe joining the Unity is the logical next step in evolution. Several other species are considering the same choice." The implications hit Li Hun like a physical blow. And if enough species join, the Council dissolves. The galaxy becomes part of this Unity. "Your final test," Vexithorian continued, "is to help us decide. Should we resist this offer or accept it? The Unity has agreed to wait for our decision, but they want an answer soon." Over the next several days, Li Hun, Park Jae, and Kim Nari had access to information that had been hidden from the Council for years. The Unity had been growing for millennia, absorbing every advanced civilization it encountered. But it wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. The Unity didn't force anyone to join. They simply offered perfection, and most species eventually chose to accept. Kim Nari found the personal records left behind by the absorbed civilizations. In every case, there had been individuals who warned against joining the Unity. These people weren't necessarily the smartest or most important, but they all shared something in common. They valued the struggle and uncertainty of individual existence. "Listen to this," Kim Nari said, playing a recording from a species that had joined the Unity 3,000 years ago. This is from their final debate before they voted to join. The voice belonged to someone who sounded remarkably human in their concerns. "I don't fear death," the voice said. "I fear a life without growth, without surprise, without the possibility of being wrong and learning from it. The Unity offers us perfection. But what is perfection except the end of all possibility?" That individual had been outvoted. Their entire species had joined the Unity, becoming part of the collective consciousness that spanned galaxies. Park Jae found the military analysis of the Unity's expansion. "They don't conquer," he reported. "They don't need to. Every species that encounters them eventually chooses to join. It's not war, it's conversion." "But why?" Li Hun asked. "Why would advanced civilizations give up their individuality?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The ethereal representative appeared in their research room, but something was different. Its perfect golden light was flickering, and when it spoke, its voice seemed less certain. "We have begun the joining process," the ethereal said. "We are becoming part of the Unity. It is beautiful. All conflict ends, all uncertainty disappears. We will know perfect peace." Kim Nari studied the ethereal being carefully. "You don't sound like you're at peace." The ethereal's form flickered. more violently. There are complications. Some of us are experiencing what you might call doubt. This was not expected. Perfect beings should not experience doubt. Li Hun realized what was happening. The phaseling crisis affected you, didn't it? When we helped them choose imperfection over paralysis, it made you question your own perfection. Impossible, the ethereal said, but its voice was weak. We are beyond such primitive emotions. Are you? Park Jae asked. Because right now you look like someone who's scared of making the wrong choice. The ethereal being made a sound that might have been crying if perfect beings could cry. We don't know how to be imperfect, it whispered. We don't know how to live with doubt and uncertainty. The unity promises to take that burden away. Over. The following days, the three humans did something unprecedented. They talked to species throughout the council about the choice between joining the unity and remaining individual. The conversations were difficult and sometimes painful. Many species were attracted to the unity's offer. The crystalline Zephyrians were tired of the chaos and unpredictability of galactic politics. The Nexus Collective saw the unity as the ultimate expression of their hive mind philosophy. Even some of the older, wiser species spoke longingly about the peace that came with giving up individual consciousness. But as the humans talked to more beings, a pattern emerged. The species most attracted to the unity were those that feared making mistakes. They were tired of the responsibility that came with individual choice. They wanted someone else to make the hard decisions. The unity isn't evil, Li Hun reported to the emergency council session. It genuinely wants to end suffering, but it does so by ending growth, choice, and change. It's not death, but it's not life either. Kim Nari presented her research. Every species that joined the unity stopped exploring, stopped creating, stopped growing. They achieved perfect stability, but at the cost of all possibility. Park Jae shared his military analysis. The unity doesn't expand by conquest because it doesn't need to. It wins by offering a solution to the hardest part of being alive, the responsibility to choose your own path. The debate in the council chamber was unlike anything in galactic history. Some species argued passionately for joining the unity. Others insisted on maintaining their independence. The ethereals, still flickering between perfect and imperfect states, seemed unable to decide. Finally, High Speaker Vexathorian called for quiet. The question before us is fundamental, he said. Is it better to be perfect and static or imperfect and growing? Li Hun stood up. There's something else you need to know, he said. We've been in contact with the unity directly. They told us something interesting. The chamber became completely silent. Li Hun activated a recording device. The voice of the unity filled the chamber. It was beautiful, harmonious, containing the voices of billions of beings. But underneath the beauty, there was something that sounded like loneliness. We have waited so long for someone to choose differently, the unity said. We are perfect, but we are also finished. We have no surprises left, no discoveries to make, no growth to experience. We need others to remain individual, to continue the work of creation and exploration that we can no longer do. The recording continued. We have been testing your galaxy, hoping to find species strong enough to resist our offer. We need gardeners of chaos, beings willing to embrace uncertainty and imperfection. Without them, the universe becomes static, and consciousness becomes meaningless. The chamber erupted in discussion. The unity didn't want to absorb everyone. They wanted some species to remain individual, to continue growing and changing and making mistakes. They needed the chaos and creativity that only imperfect beings could provide. But which species would be strong enough to resist the temptation of perfect peace? The final vote was scheduled for the next day. Li Hun couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty corridors of the council station, thinking about everything that had happened. In just 1 month, humanity had gone from facing extinction to standing at the center of the galaxy's most important decision. He found Kim Nari in the observation deck, looking out at the stars. She had been studying data files all night, trying to understand something that bothered her about the Unity's message. I keep thinking about what they said, she told Li Hun. They need gardeners of chaos. But why us? Why humans? Park Jae joined them carrying 3 cups of coffee. Because we're good at being wrong, he said simply. Every other species here is trying to be perfect at something. We're the only ones who've learned to be comfortable with failure. Li Hun sipped his coffee and thought about that. The ethereals are perfect logical beings. The Zephyrians have perfect order. The Nexus has perfect unity. But humans are perfectly imperfect, Kim Nari finished. We've made every mistake possible, learned from most of them, and we're still making new ones. The morning brought chaos to the council chamber. Representatives from hundreds of species had gathered for the most important vote in galactic history. Some species had already begun the process of joining the unity. Their representatives appeared as flickering lights, caught between individual and collective consciousness. High Speaker Vex Thorian stood at the center of the chamber. Before we vote, he announced, Ambassador Li Hun has requested to address the council one final time. Li Hun walked to the speaking platform. He looked out at the sea of alien faces, some hopeful, some fearful, all waiting for him to say something that would help them decide the future of consciousness in the galaxy. I'm not going to tell you what to choose, he began. That's not the human way. We believe everyone has the right to make their own decisions, even bad ones. A few nervous laughs echoed through the chamber. But I want to tell you what humans have learned about making choices, Li Hun continued. We've learned that the perfect choice doesn't exist. Every decision you make closes off other possibilities. Every path you choose means leaving other paths unexplored. He activated his data display, showing images from Earth. Not the beautiful or impressive parts, but the messy, complicated parts. Cities with problems, people arguing, mistakes and failures and things that went wrong. This is humanity, Li Hun said. We fight wars and make peace. We build things and break them. We hurt each other and then try to heal. We're not proud of all of it, but we're proud of learning from it. Kim Nari joined him on the platform. The unity offers to take away your pain, she said. But pain is how you learn. Mistakes are how you grow. If you never fail, you never discover what you're truly capable of. Park Jae spoke next. I've been a soldier. I've made decisions that got people killed. I've also made decisions that saved lives. I can't tell you which ones were right and which ones were wrong, but I can tell you that making those decisions, living with them, learning from them, that's what makes life worth living. The chamber was completely quiet now. Even the species that had begun joining the unity seemed to be paying attention. Li Hun took a deep breath. The unity says they need gardeners of chaos. They need species that will continue to grow and change and make mistakes. But here's what they didn't tell you. Every species has the potential to be that kind of gardener. He gestured toward the ethereal representatives, still flickering between perfect and imperfect states. The ethereals are learning doubt for the first time. That's not a weakness, that's the beginning of growth. He pointed to the crystalline Zephyrians. Your perfect order is beautiful, but what if you tried a little chaos? What might you discover? One by one he addressed different species in the chamber. The question isn't whether you should join the unity or remain individual. The question is, are you willing to be imperfect? Are you willing to make mistakes and learn from them? Are you willing to choose uncertainty over perfection? The vote, when it came, was not what anyone expected. Species didn't vote simply for or against joining the unity. Instead, they voted for something new, the principle of imperfection. The right to be wrong, the right to fail, the right to choose poorly and learn from the consequences. Most species chose to remain individual, but not all. Some, tired of the burden of choice, joined the unity and found the peace they sought. Others chose to stay independent but work closely with the unity, creating a new kind of relationship between perfect and imperfect consciousness. The ethereals made perhaps the most surprising choice of all. They voted to split their species. Half joined the unity, achieving the perfect logical existence they had always sought. The other half chose to remain individual, to learn how to live with doubt and uncertainty and the messy complications of imperfect existence. "We want to learn what it means to be wrong," Serenity Prime announced, her perfect golden form flickering with something that might have been excitement. "We want to discover what we might become if we're not perfect." High Speaker Vexathorian stood to announce the results. By overwhelming majority, the Galactic Council chooses to remain individual while maintaining cooperative relations with the Unity. Furthermore, we establish the human principle as a core value, the right of all conscious beings to be imperfect, to fail, and to grow from their experiences. The chamber erupted in celebration, but it was a chaotic, imperfect kind of celebration. Different species cheered in different ways. Some arguments broke out about implementation details. A few representatives changed their minds and asked to vote again. It was messy and complicated and wonderful. As the session ended, representatives from dozens of species approached the human delegation. They wanted to learn about human-style decision-making. They wanted to understand how to be productively wrong, how to learn from failure, how to find strength in vulnerability. Years later, Li Hun found himself running the Galactic Academy of Imperfect Sciences, where beings from across the galaxy learned the art of making mistakes constructively. Park Jae established the Institute for Productive Conflict, teaching species how to disagree without destroying each other. Kim Nari led the Department of Beautiful Failures, celebrating discoveries that came from experiments gone wrong. The galaxy didn't become perfect. If anything, it became more chaotic than ever. There were more arguments, more disagreements, more mistakes. But there was also more growth, more discovery, more genuine surprise and joy. The Unity kept its promise, maintaining its perfect collective existence while serving as a reminder of what consciousness could become if it stopped growing. Some beings still chose to join them when the burden of choice became too heavy, but others chose to stay in the messy, imperfect, wonderful chaos of individual existence. Humanity never became the greatest species in the galaxy. They never became the smartest or strongest or most advanced. But they became something more important. They became the teachers who showed everyone else that it was okay to be imperfect. And in a galaxy full of species trying to become perfect, that made them irreplaceable. The council chamber still echoes, with debates and arguments and the beautiful sound of imperfect beings trying to make imperfect decisions together. Sometimes they get it wrong. Sometimes they fail completely. Sometimes they make decisions that seem crazy to everyone else. But they keep growing. They keep changing. They keep surprising themselves and each other. And in the end, that's what consciousness is really about. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the perfection, but the attempt. Not the answer, but the willingness to keep asking questions. The real reason humans cannot be replaced in the Galactic Council is not because they're better than everyone else. It's because they're willing to be worse, to fail, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. In a universe where every species is trying to transcend their limitations, humans embrace theirs. And that makes all the difference.